certification on this thing or anything like that. So you're pretty much, if you dip it in water, then you're pretty much screwed. But that's really it on the outside. There's really not too much more to hit on. It's a pretty minimalistic phone, but that was the whole approach that LG was trying to go for, at least in this time. And even now, they're still trying to go for it. So that pretty much covers it up on the outside. Now, hating on the software, this thing was released with Android 5.1.1 Lollipop. We are able to upgrade it to Android 7.0, which is kind of cool, I guess. But in terms of software support, you're completely outdated. This thing is not getting any more software support anymore, so that's kind of sad. But honestly, at the same time, it's like, what do you expect? It's a pretty old phone. There's really not much more going for it. So the G5 is outdated, the G6 is outdated, maybe the G7's, I don't really remember. But the cool thing about the G4, and I just looked at this, is that for some reason the LG lineup of phones have been always pretty easy to root and customize. So that's really cool. So you can always, rooting is one thing, and I've stated this before, rooting is really cool. You can get a lot of access to a lot of certain different things within your phone that you weren't necessarily able to get before. But my main thing that I always try to look for in a phone are the custom ROMs, because that is the thing that I personally go out to look for. That is the main thing that I do. I like getting the most up-to-date software that I can find on a phone. So rooting is one thing, but custom ROMing is a whole nother thing. And what the thing with custom ROMs is that if that phone has a development community behind it, there will pretty much always be custom ROMs for that thing. But if nobody cares about the phone anymore, then there's not going to be any ROMs. And I actually did some research, and for some G4 variants, there is a Lineage OS 16.0 ROM out for this thing, which is really cool. So that's about Android 9.0, which is pretty crazy. So if you want to install Android Pie, you are able to do that on some LG G4s. Not all of them, like I stated, some of them aren't supported, but you are able to do it on some of them, which is a really, really cool thing. So there might be some more. Maybe there's even a Lineage OS 17 ROM out for this thing. But as of me making this video, that was the most up-to-date one I was able to see. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. When you have an older phone like this, I think it's really, really important to custom ROM it and update it to the most up-to-date version you're able to get on it. I don't think it's worth it to go and just keep it on the old version, on Android 7.0 or whatever. It's worth it to go and update it, even if it requires you to root it or custom ROM it. So in terms of the outside and the software, that pretty much covers it there. Now, hitting on the performance side of things, this thing has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 chipset, a hexa-core CPU, and Adreno 418 GPU. There was only one model of this phone with the 32 gig model with 3 gigs of RAM. Now, in terms of performances, I think when this phone first came out, it was a pretty powerful phone. I think this was one of the top tier ones. I think 2015, that was the year we saw the Galaxy S6 and the iPhone 6s and those phones. So this phone, I think, was comparable to those at the time, but I feel like even like a year later after this thing was released, all the phones in the market started getting much, much faster. So this thing kind of was at the peak end of its career right when it was released, because this phone was trying to compete with those phones. So in terms of performance, I think it's slower than a 6S. I think it's about the same speed as a Galaxy S6, to be honest. It's not a horrible phone. LG's UI, for some reason, I just never liked it. It's just such a weird looking software, so it's best if you install Nova Launcher or something like that. So in terms of the software itself, it's not horrible, but the performance aspect of it, I think, gets bogged down quite a bit because of the software and the UI. There's a lot of background processes going around on this thing too. So say what you will, I don't think it's a horrible performing phone, especially when you consider the age, but I don't think it's a good performing phone at the, especially even when you compare it to other 2016 phones or 2015 phones, looking at like the iPhone 6s, which has probably held up the best out of all 2015 phones that were released. And on top of that, if you look at it with the S6, I just installed a Lineage OS 17.1 ROM out on that thing that's Android 10, and that phone has been very good on that software. So I'm sure if you custom ROM the LG G4, that'll be much better, it'll last you much longer, but that is a very important thing to note. So in terms of performance, I don't think this phone is a bad performing device, but I don't think it's necessarily the best anymore. And I don't think even out of the 2015 phones it held up the best out of those ones either. So this phone is a pretty slow phone in my opinion. However, if you custom ROM it, that'll probably be a different story. So that pretty much covers it up there. Now, hitting on the cameras, this thing has a single 16 megapixel camera on the back. You are able to shoot 4K videos at 30 frames per second, which is really cool. But other than that, that's really pretty much it. The cameras on the LG phones at this time were probably among the best. A lot of people hype these things up, and honestly, rightfully so. These cameras were really, really good. But obviously, as of today, it doesn't really hold up that well. We have cameras that have triple camera, quadruple camera setups in them. And when you look at a phone like this, with a single camera setup, that's not necessarily the best look. So what I can tell you is, in terms of the way this camera is and everything, I probably would say it's okay. It's definitely not the best. You have laser autofocus, you have OIS and things like that, but it's not enough camera that I would recommend people to buy and go get. So in terms of the camera, I'll probably give it like a, average for 2015. Obviously not good anymore. Obviously not that great anymore, but for 2015 phone, I don't think it's that bad. Now, ending it off, you have that 3000 milliamp hour battery, which the battery itself isn't really that crazy, but the removable aspect of it is probably my favorite thing about this phone. You have the capability of removing this battery, putting a new one in, putting a bigger one in, which is so amazingly awesome. So the battery life on that 3000 milliamp hours might not be the best, but